in the oneness, living in the oneness of God. As I thought about that, the text that our ministries are embracing, one, I don't know what happened to all of those ones that we had around here, but I certainly like to see some more ones in the building that greeted us on last week, the ones. As I thought about the one, Paul is writing to the church in Ephesus. And in this text that we just read here, he is exhorting them to live in oneness. Paul is exhorting the church to live in oneness. And Paul says in verse 1 of Ephesians chapter 1 that living in oneness reflects who you are in Christ Jesus. And I think all of us must be a reflection not of who we are in the neighborhood, not of who we are among society. We must not necessarily reflect who people say we are, but we must be a reflection of who we are in Jesus Christ. Now, I think all of you understand what I mean by this. I just got home from the family reunion, and it probably cost me, I said to Rickey, it probably cost me $500 in giveaway money. And the reason for that is those little nieces and nephews, they bring their report cards. They come, they know your name. They come and they greet you, and I heard E.B. Hill say once that every time somebody greet you, that's $20. So when the little nieces come, you got to reach in your pocket and give them money. And my daughter Rakita asked me, Dad, why do you keep giving the money to the nieces and nephews? And I really know that that's not the priority, the prioritized concern. The concern is the fact that the more goes over there, the less comes over here. But I said to she and Rickey, I remember when I was a little boy, coming to the family reunions, how the uncles used to reach in their pockets and give you $10, give you $20. They paid us to wash the car. They paid us to shine their shoes. They paid us to put the ice in the crates, and they paid us, just gave us money. We didn't, you know what I'm talking about. We didn't have to. I think they were really saying to us, I don't want you out there doing anything wrong to get money. And I want you to know that if you need, then you can come to us and not have to sell yourself short in any wise to get money. Now, that was over 40 years ago. And when I look at those uncles today who used to be the ones barbecuing all night long, now I look at them before night gets here, they gone to bed. And we are the ones who have to come in now and get the whole hog ready to go in the pit in the ground. Somebody know what I'm talking about. We are the ones now who have to buy the food and make sure that the family reunion goes off. But not only that, we're the ones now who have to look out for the little nieces and nephews, because we're not the little ones anymore. Who my granddad, who my great grandparents were, my grandparents became. And who my grandparents used to be, my mother is now. And who my mother and my uncles and aunts used to be, y'all know what I'm talking about. That's who we are now. And those little nieces and nephews are who we used to be. And so Paul says in this text, he says that you ought to be a reflection of Christ, and those little ones reflect us as we reflect those who have gone on before us. And so in this text, I hear Paul is writing to the church, and he's exhorting them. He's saying, live in a way. Live in a way that is a reflection on you and your life. And I guess I'm really trying to ask you today, can you see yourself reflecting, you get to the reunion and somebody say, boy, you look like Big Jim. Girl, you look like your mother. You look like your auntie. You look like your aunt. Can you see yourself kind of resembling Christ? Because everybody that you know is passing away. I know mama say I feel good. I know mama mama say I feel good. Mama say nothing bothers me. But I can look at mama and I can tell today that mama ain't who she used to be. But that's all right, because when I look in my own mirror, can I get a witness here? When I look in my own mirror, I discover that I'm not who I used to be. Paul talks about reflecting. It was not a simple decision made when he talks about the Christians in this church being one Lord, one faith, one God, one baptism. Not a simple decision. They were responding. They were responding. When Paul stood up in the church of Ephesus and he said, there is one Lord and one faith and one baptism. He says, you were called to the one hope. And he's saying to them, this is not really a choice that you have. I know some of you got up this morning and thought and think that you thought yourself to come to church this morning, but the Bible teaches us that it is God who wills in us the will to even think right. So what I'm really trying to tell you is you can't just get up on your own and think good. God wills good thinking in us. I mean, maybe you don't feel as close to God as the person who claps their hand more than you. And maybe you don't feel as close to God as the person who leads the church song, but God wills in you the spirit to even be where the church is going on. Paul talks about the high calling. He says, something made you come to church this morning. Something moved you to come to church this morning. I mean, everybody full of something, full of barbecue, full of mac and cheese, full of spaghetti, full of baked beans. You ain't got it all out your system yet, and full of bologna, full of hot dogs and chicken, and yet you had to press. And that's fine. All I want you to know is you're not pressing on your own. The Bright Clouds sing a song here in Rochester that says something inside of me that's telling me to go ahead. Paul calls that something, he calls it a high calling. And he says in verse 1, you don't get this from the seminary, you get this calling from God. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 2, he says, I therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. And when I looked at this text today, Ralph, I said, there will be people listening to me who think that this sermon is just for me because I'm called to preach. And I said, why do I preach about a calling? And then Paul and the Lord and the Holy Spirit said, keep reading. He says, keep reading. Every calling is not just to stand here in the pulpit and preach, but all of us are called. And so I began to wrestle with the Spirit as Jacob did with the Lord. And I said, Lord, well, what is the calling that causes us to have solidarity? I said, what is this calling that will call us to live in the oneness of God? What is this calling that will cause my wife and me and your wife and you to be on one accord? What is this calling? Because you call this a calling, but not only do you call it a calling, you call it a high calling. And so as I was arguing with the Lord, because I didn't want people to get quiet on me and look at me strange like y'all are doing, I talked to the Lord, and the Lord said, just keep reading. And you will discover that everybody who sits and listens to the word of God this morning have been called. But if you look at the next verse, verse 2, it will tell us what we've been called to. We've been called with humility. Humility is a calling. In other words, when you've been called, you know, I just can't decide that I preach and not preach, I serve and not serve. I got to serve. And when you've been called, you can't decide that you want to sing today and you don't want to sing tomorrow. You got to sing. I mean, when you usher, if that's your calling, you just can't usher when you don't have anything new to wear and you put on your usher dress. That's not a calling. That's just doing something that you want to do. When you've been called, you got to serve when you don't feel like serving. You got to go when you don't feel like going. You got to go when people are clapping for you, but you also got to go when they're booing you, because it's your calling. It's your calling. It's your calling. And so he says in this text, you are called to humility. So if you got to serve when you don't want to serve, if you got to go when you don't want to go, you've got to be, he's saying, God has called us to humility even when circumstances are difficult. Even when you like to take your coat off and take your shoes off and say, follow me outside, God says in order for there to be solidarity, there must be humility even in hostile situations. Because what he's saying in this text is everybody humble together. You don't know where there's humility there or not. And he says, I'll let you know in time. I'll put you in some situations. I'll put you in some situations. I'll put you in some circumstances where you can know. And you can leave saying, like the old church saying, I know I've been changed. That's when solidarity comes in. That's when living in the oneness of God comes in, when you can say, I know I've been changed. I'm in this hostile situation, and not only is the hostile situation, the situation hostile, but I'm right. And you all know how we are when we're right. I want everybody to know that I'm right. Let me tell you this, my brother, and maybe I have to hear a lot of my family reunion in this sermon, and I try not to put in any more sermon, but my nephew called, he says, and he says on the speakerphone, he says, Uncle Rick, I'm trying to get to the Raleigh Spring Mall. I said, just get on Highway 14 and go south. My brother said, no, it's not Highway 14, it's Austin P. Well, you know, Austin P and Highway 14 is like Ridge Road and 104. Dover, I said, get on Highway 14 and go south. And my brother just became, it's not Highway 14, it's Austin P. I didn't open my mouth. Can I tell y'all something? If y'all want to know what I'm learning in my later days, if I could give y'all something to learn today, learn how not to open your mouth. You understand? If you learn not to talk, you don't have, if you're right, you don't have to prove that you're right. And so not only that, my brother told it was his son talking to me, and that's a flag right there. Why your son asking me, who lives in New York, how to get to the mall in Memphis? So my brother said, wait, and he pulls out his phone and he Googles it. He said, oh, it's the same street. You're right. So what I'm trying to tell you is when Paul says solidarity is when you walk in humility. You don't have to prove that you're right. You don't have to prove that you're wrong. You don't have to prove anything. Be who you are. Just be. But not only does he say, because our church's theme is solidarity. Our church's theme is walking in oneness. So what I'm trying to tell you is somebody has to take the low road. There's a dominant and a recessive. There's an aggressive person, and there's one who's a little more passionate. Somebody has got to be a little more passionate. Somebody's got to go a little easy, because he says living in the oneness of God means that humility is on the table. But not only does he say is there humility on the table, but he says gentleness. Look at the text. It says gentleness. In other words, God is saying to us, you can really have what you say you want. You say you want a church of oneness. You say you want a family of oneness. You say you want a ministry of oneness. You say you want a town of oneness. He said, well, somebody has got to be gentle. Somebody's got to be gentle. Both of us can't stand and go toe to toe and face to face and eye to eye and neck to neck. Somebody's got to just stop. Somebody's got to stop. Can I just get somebody to stop? Stop. You are right. You're right. He says gentleness. And then he says, and do that with patience. Now, the reason why he says patience is because everybody will do it one time. So you leave here behind this sermon today, and you leave here saying, oh, I'm walking in humility. You leave here behind this sermon today, and you'll say, I'm walking in the spirit of gentleness. But you're only going to do it so much. When this sermon wears off, you've gone back to standing toe to toe. And so what he says is, if there is going to be oneness, if there's going to be solidarity, I'm not just talking about the church, because the church is our home. I'm talking about in our home. I'm talking about everywhere we go. And it's so easy. Can I talk for a minute? It's so easy to pop off at somebody. Oh, I was in Top's grocery store the other day. I had a watermelon in my hand, and a lady pulls up in front of me with a basket, and you could tell that she was 4th of July shopping. And all I had was a watermelon that would not have taken but 2 minutes to pay for this watermelon. But this lady runs in front of me. She says, "Sir, I'm in a hurry." I'm standing in the line, and she says, "I'm in a hurry." I just kind of backed away. I turned, and I got one of those magazines that was talking about Barack Obama. And I stood there and read the whole magazine. Somebody say patience. Somebody say patience. So Paul is saying, and I'm getting ready to leave you when I tell you this, Paul is saying, don't talk about solidarity if you're not willing to humble yourself. Don't talk about oneness unless you're willing to walk in the spirit of oneness. He's saying here, don't plan oneness for everybody else and you remain the same. Don't plan gentleness for everybody else. What have you planned for yourself? But then he says here, this patience. In other words, it's not going to change because you had Solidarity Sunday last Sunday and expect everything to be solidarity. He says it's not going to change. Have patience. Tina Turner was right and James Cleveland was right when they said, please be patient with me. God's not through with me. When he gets through with me, I'm coming forth. And so all of us have to understand, just like God is not through with me, I said, just like God is not through with me, just like God is not through with me, he's not through with you. God's not through. Now, that lady got by at Tops, but I don't know what would happen if it happened at Wegmans. But I know God's not through with me. Am I talking to somebody today who can say that God's not through? But then Paul keeps talking. He says, bearing with one another in love. In other words, Paul is saying, learn how to feel other folk. Somebody said the Indian prayer, grant, I will not criticize my neighbor until I have walked a mile in his moccasin. You don't know what you would do if you were me. I don't know what I would do if I were you. If you were me, you would make the same decisions that I make because you wouldn't be you, you would be me. Patience. Bear with one another. In other words, sometimes we've got to learn how to just put up. You know how I'm learning to put up? Because I'm discovering that God is putting up with me. That's what I'm really discovering. That's what I'm really discovering. I'm discovering that God is putting up with me. I'm going to tell you a secret, and I hope y'all don't tell anybody. I'm not everything that I should be. Don't tell anybody I told you that. But I'm not everything that I should be. I say some things that I ought not say. I think some things that I ought not do. I go some places that I ought not go. I know some folk that I ought not know. God is not through with me yet. What I really want to know is, am I talking to somebody in this building who can say he's working on me? But the beauty of this text, when Paul talks about us living in the oneness of God, he says we're called to reflect God's character. We're called to reflect God, and he said that includes, and the interesting thing about this text is he doesn't say anything about the sermon that you preach. In other words, he says, I don't care how good and how many points you have in your sermon, that's not what reflects God. Because give the book to anybody, and anybody can study and get the points together. So he's saying that's not what reflects God. I mean, Louis, I got a text message today saying you killing over there today. You were putting that song down, but Paul does not talk about the song that we sing. Can I get a witness here? I mean, it's a nice crowd of folk in here today, but Linda, God's not talking about the crowd. There's nothing in the text that says anything about the crowd. Everything that he talks about is found in the heart. Humility is in your heart. Gentleness is in your heart. Patience is in your heart. Love is in your heart. Unity is in your heart. Solidarity is in your heart. Oneness is in your heart. And so when Paul talks about this unity that these believers have, he says that it comes from the Spirit